All right, for just a few minutes today, we're going to be looking at landscaping do's and don'ts. These are things that we have all seen in the landscape over a number of years, and hopefully you can go through some of these and say, well, I've made that mistake. I'm going to fix that from now on. So this is just going to be a brief presentation on landscaping mistakes and also things we need to do in the landscape. So I broke this up in about 6 or 7 different rules, and we're going to jump through these. So the first rule that I've seen in landscaping is always putting the wrong plant in the wrong spot. I don't know if you know what this plant is or not, but this is equisetum, which is also called horsetail. And you talk about one vigorous plant in the garden. And this was at a landscape in Lebanon, Tennessee. And the issue with this plant, it will take over any landscape that it's actually planted in. So you can actually see that it's already started to take over this poor monkey grass that's getting beaten up by it already. But we have plants that are very specific on where they need to be growing. We kind of fit plants into really tight, narrow spaces where they shouldn't even begin to be. So these poor arborvitaes were wedged into a really small area that was probably 18 inches wide in downtown Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg. And I would assume that the landscaper had to cut the roots to actually squeeze them into that little area. I would like to go back to this area to see how they were within a couple of years, because it's been a couple of years since I've seen this. The issue with this is plants grow. We plant plants in certain areas and we don't expect them to ever grow. Well, that's not the nature of plants. They have to be able to get bigger. They have to be able to grow wide. In these areas like this, they don't really have a lot of places, especially for their roots to grow. So we have to think about, what is the plant going to look like in 10 years? And we're going to be talking about pruning briefly also. We see plants that are just planted in the wrong spot completely. The first example here, hostas or shade plants. So this was next to a pool at a hotel, and these lovely hostas were getting beaten up by the sun in the middle of summer. These plants need to go in the shade. And a lot of times we don't really look at the tags. If you're a new landscaper, if you're a new gardener, you don't really know where all these plants go. You buy them because they're really pretty at the nursery. You already have a spot for it, but we don't look to see where this plant is going to be most successful at. Coral bells, we also call them heuchera. These are native shade woodland plants. Normally in Tennessee, you find them in moist areas next to creek beds and streams. You don't find them in full sun surrounded by concrete. You can already tell in this picture that they're already starting to get burned. This is probably one called citronelle. And this was at a Walmart parking lot here recently. You kind of feel bad for the plant. Number 2, so the first landscape do's and don'ts, planting the wrong plant in the wrong spot. Number 2 is planting the wrong plant completely. It's easy to find a lot of these plants at most local nurseries, garden centers, and any of the big box stores. But I'm an extension agent, and these are my 5 plants that I've been discouraging people from planting, because these are the ones that I get the most calls on every year. And as we go through these, I'm going to jump through and show you a couple of things of why we shouldn't be planting these plants. Number 1, Leland cypress. They are not drought tolerant. And in Tennessee, do we ever go through periods of drought? Oh, yeah. Do we ever go through periods where we'll get 6 or 9 inches of rain in a week? Oh, yeah. Leland cypress do not like that. The other big issue with Leland cypress is they get a disease called Ceridium canker, especially when they are stressed out. And I'll show you some pictures of that. And I'm going to go through this list individually and show you pictures of each of the plants. These Leland cypress, the number 1 call I get about them is usually drought. They do not like being in a long period of drought. So when they get stressed out, there are some fungi that's constantly blowing through the wind called Ceridium canker. So you have a beautiful screen of Leland cypress, and one has a random branch dying. So how do we see them planted? We see 50 in a row blocking out their neighbors. And on that one, there'll be one random branch dying. And if you go back to where the branch is actually dying to where it's back to green wood, you'll see some sap, amber colored sap coming out. that fungus is inside the plant. So what happens when you have 50 plants touching and one of them gets the fungus, Ceridium canker, and they're all susceptible to it? It just hits one and goes right next to the other, goes right next to the other, goes right next to the other. We have got to space out these plants with other species that do not get the same diseases. And here's some more. And these were calls that I had received in Lebanon in the middle of winter. Some had just got some random branches and they wanted me to come look, and you find the open wounds on the plant already. Unfortunately, there is no treatment for it other than removal of the infected material. But we see at nurseries cultivars of Leland cypress that are beautiful. We see golden ones, but they also have the same issues. Laurels are extremely commonly planted right now. The issue with laurels is they are in the peach family, and if you have ever tried to grow peaches, you understand how much of a challenge they can actually be. Peaches are susceptible to peach tree borer. So this little insect will get inside of the base of the stem, drill a hole, lay its eggs, and start killing random branches. This was here in Lebanon around our courthouse, and we normally see this plant planted around hedges, and it's usually kept and manicured like a rectangle or a box or something. But they are also susceptible to another issue called shot hole. So people will call and they'll say, something is eating my laurels up. There are holes everywhere in the leaf. Nope, that's actually a fungus or a bacteria called shot hole, and it's just where water droplets land on the leaf and the fungus or the bacteria lands on the water droplet and the plant sheds it. It is not an insect, but normally when we see holes in the leaf, my first reaction also is something's eating it, but that's not the case for this. Pin oaks are having a hard time right now, and the problem is they're normally planted 10 or 15 in a row, and this was in a homeowner's residence in Mount Juliet. He had 10 or 15 pin oaks planted on both sides of his driveway, and they are probably 30 to 40 feet tall. This is called bacterial leaf scorch. Bacterial leaf scorch is a bacterium that gets inside the plant and slowly shuts off water flow. But it mimics drought stress, so you will actually see the edges of the leaves in that right picture start burning. There is no treatment for it. Normally the bottom leaves start dropping, and you'll see the whole plant within about a year or two die. And here was in this same row at this homeowner's house in Mount Juliet, about every other one has already been infected by bacterial leaf scorch. This is spread by bugs. And if you have a bug that gets this bacterium inside of its gut and it's able to fly, it's able to jump from plant species to plant species, you better believe it's going to spread it on every plant that it chews up. Now, roses, we had knockout roses 20, 25 years ago, and they were touted to be the most disease-resistant rose in the world, and they were at the time. Well, we have a virus now called rose rosette, and it's spread by a mite that pretty much blows through the wind, called an aerified mite. Normally, you'll see a rosette of growth. The blooms are twisted, the new growth is red, and also on the stem, you will see an influx of thorns. But I wanted to show you this. If you see this, there's also no treatment for this virus inside the plant. Normally, it's best to just dig it up and throw it away. And this was actually on a wild rose, and thankful to the Soil Pest and Plant Center for this picture. I would assume that most gardeners are not planting Bradford pears anymore, but I wanted to show you this picture. This was at a homeowner. A lady had just bought a cabin, and she wanted me to come look at a Bradford pear that she had on the property. And the previous homeowner, when that Bradford pear had split, he wrapped a chain and a come-along around it and ratcheted that baby back together, and it grew, and it eventually grew into the chain. There's really no treatment for something like this, but Bradford pears, they all have an expiration date. Also, their invasive tendencies of spreading seedlings all over Mother Nature has been a challenge for foresters and also homeowners with pastures right now. So that was number 2. Number 3, purchasing unhealthy material. How many of you, when you buy plants at nurseries, actually look for the diseases, you look for the bugs, and you take it, if it's possible, if it's small enough, take it out of the container and you look at the roots. If the roots are healthy and they're white, you're fine. If the roots are black, then you're going to have some other issues such as root rot later on. So why do you think some of these plants are on the sales rack in the back for a quarter or 50 cents? I won't say all the time, but a lot of the time they will have some root issues, especially on some of the junipers that just weren't watered or cared for properly. Find factual information on recommended plants. UT Gardens websites, we have 3 UT Gardens in the state, and also look on their Facebook pages. Local nurseries can have good material and they can also have bad material. Look for this book if you are a tree or shrub person, The Manual of Woody Landscape Plants by Michael Durr, and also inspect your plants before you bring home a disease, before you bring home some new insects, before you bring home some new viruses to your garden. Be really picky what you bring in. Look for this material. Make sure it's healthy. These are some yellow twig dogwoods with some cankers already popping up on them. You don't want to see issues like this on plants that you're buying. Look at your boxwoods. Boxwoods are also having some issues right now. They should have healthy stems. They shouldn't have any growth on them that's black or yellow or white. We need to gain knowledge about what's coming down the pipeline. So 100 years ago, we had Dutch elm disease introduced. We had chestnut blight introduced, and that wiped out a lot of our native trees. But we've also, it seems like every year or two, we have something new that's coming into our country. If you haven't heard of some of these things, gain some knowledge on these. Crepe myrtle bark scale, spotted lanternfly, emerald ash borer, brown marmorated stink bug, and also the ambrosia beetle or the flat-headed apple borer. If you are not let me start this again. If you're on Facebook, go and follow the Soil Plant and Pest Center in Nashville. They do an excellent job of highlighting what's coming down in the state, what's new, what's diseased, what's found in certain places of the state, and they do a great job of promoting plants that are more disease resistant. You can see in this example right here of them highlighting some newer cultivars and impatiens which are resistant to downy mildew. Here was crepe myrtle bark scale. It's not been in our state too long, but it has swept across our state within less than 10 years. It was first found in Memphis, and it's already been found in Knoxville. This is ambrosia beetle. We had a homeowner call. He had a newly planted maple tree, and within 24 hours, its leaves were already wilted. And you had to really look because this hole and this little bitty fleck of sawdust coming out is about the size, the diameter of a toothpick. So we had one beetle crawl in, drilled it all inside, and killed this maple within just a couple of days. But we also need to know that not all bugs are bad. We have some bugs that are good. We have some that are bad. So I don't want you to just take any insecticide and spray and kill everything because we have some that are good. Do you know what this is? If you are a gardener and you have squash, this is the one insect that you absolutely hate. This is squash bugs. But then we see these ugly guys and we think, that looks rough. He has got to be a bad guy. Absolutely not. That's the Gulf fritillary, little native butterfly feeding on our native passion vine. So don't see a bug and think, I'm just got to kill it because it's ugly. I think he's beautiful in his own right. Pruning, put down those pruners after August. Boxwood pruning. If we go through and prune a boxwood in October, we have a flush of warm weather. They're going to send up new growth, and all that new growth is going to be killed. I get a ton of calls in the springtime of winter burn on boxwoods, and it's just boxwoods that were pruned in late fall. Determine the correct species for pruning in the wintertime, and also never top a tree. If your landscaper suggests topping a tree, it's time to find a new landscaper. On hydrangeas, it can get real tricky. So sometimes people will call and they'll say, I've got some hydrangeas. When do I prune them? I don't know. It all depends on when they bloom and when they actually form their flowers. So all the macrophyllus generally, and I'm not going to go through the cultivars of Summer Crush, Endless Summer, but the old-fashioned ones, Nico Blue, Red Mazda, they normally form their flower buds in the fall of the previous year. So if you go in the wintertime and you cut down all those ugly stems, you will have no flowers in the springtime. All right, so let's switch it around. We have some hydrangeas that form their flowers in the springtime, so you can cut them in the wintertime. So the paniculatas, like this is little lime right here in this picture. I could go through in late winter and cut those things back to 2 feet, and they will still bloom that year. The arborescens, we call them Annabelles sometimes. Well, they also bloom on new wood. So make sure you're determining the right species. You're pruning at the right time. Winter burn on a boxwood. Someone pruned it in late September, October. We had a flush of warm weather in November. They all leafed out again and they all got burnt back. There's nothing you can do about this other than just pruning your boxwoods in late winter. This was a southern magnolia. A homeowner called about some other issues in her yard, and her landscaper had topped her tree, and she kind of went on the suggestions of the landscaper. So please make sure you're finding the right landscaper to do. Normally on something like this, you would never ever do something like this. I was pretty shocked when I pulled in her driveway. If you're a gardener, you've probably heard the term crepe myrtle plenty of times. Crepe myrtles bloom on new wood. Cutting back ruins the sculptural form. And if you want a short crepe myrtle to stay 6 or 8 feet, just find one that stays 6 or 8 feet. A lot of the newer maroon colored leaf ones, they're in the Midnight series, Ebony series, they stay smaller. So you're not having to cut them all the time. So here's where it gets tricky. People in landscapes, they want a beautiful red crepe myrtle. Well, the easiest one to find is dynamite. If you leave a dynamite crepe myrtle alone, which is in this picture, they will get up to 25 feet tall. All right, well, say I don't want one that tall. You can find one called Red Rocket that'll stay 15 to 20. If you want a short one that has the same red color, look at Red Rooster. It's going to stay around 10 feet. Now, I've seen all of these for sale. You sometimes will have to go searching in other nurseries and things. So I went to a nursery last week. They had Red Rocket, they had Red Rooster, and they had Dynamite. And if you want a small one, keep one smaller. So when we see people doing this to crepe myrtles, we're going to get the influx of growth of where you cut. And within a couple of years, those influx are going to look like big knots and they will actually start rotting. There's no point in actually pruning a tree like this. I can't remember where this was, but they went through and tipped every branch. They cut through all the roses and made them into boxes. These hollies, they were all shaped into boxes. Normally, I'm of the opinion that the only plant that should be shaped like a box has box in its name. Proper planting. A local bank had planted a whole row of red maple trees in the front to try to line the street here in Lebanon. Well, the middle one died. Isn't that how it goes? And it's hard to find something of the same size that you can replace it with. And they called and they said, we need you to come look at this tree. And I went and looked, and they had left all the straps around the base of the tree, and it had just rotted at the base. And that was just, we've got to plant these plants properly so they can actually have a fighting chance to live. One other thing is, we had another homeowner call, and the landscaper left all the wire baskets on her shrubs and trees and just planted them like that. We have got to cut those wire baskets off. And you probably have heard other horror stories like that. You may have to go back through and double check after your landscaper. Don't stake these trees unless they are constantly falling over. This poor tree didn't really have a fighting chance. Their roots do not actually get adjusted to having wind. So in the case like this was a row, I think it was some type of crabapple lining a driveway. Every one of them was staked so tight they couldn't really move. And the last thing I wanted to hit on in the garden, clean up the garden in the wintertime. We have some issues with some bugs overwintering. We have some issues with some diseases overwintering, especially on previously diseased material. If you go through and just clean up all that stuff, get rid of it, that will really help suppress the number of diseases and insects that you have issues with next year. Well, I appreciate your time today, and I hope you found some of this information informative. If you have any questions, please reach out to your extension agent. They'll be glad to help you.